Hello, Husker fans. We are here again with the Pick Six podcast. I'm Sam McKewon along with Dirk Chatelain and Tom Shatel. It's a coaching search Thursday. It's a quarterback Thursday. It's a Nebraska basketball preview Thursday with the heavy hitters. Hello, everyone. Tom, Dirk, how you doing?
I'm great. We let them know what was going through your head. This is the life of a sports editor. He's just asking Tom about December 4th and the scenario in which Nebraska hires a football coach on the same day as the Creighton-Nebraska basketball game and how we were going to staff that. So
that's right.
Just a little bit of a lens into Sam McKewon's brain right there.
That's right. We've got a meeting next week to talk about the NCAA volleyball tournament because Nebraska's going to make the Final Four, I think. Tom, how are you doing?
Hell, Creighton might too.
They might.
Well, let's see where Wisconsin is first before we. And I know Nebraska last year got swept by Wisconsin at home. They went down to Austin and they won. But, I didn't like the way they played Wisconsin at all last week. But I'm doing great. What year was it? 2007. They fired Bill Callahan on a Saturday morning.
Waved.
Tom Osborne came in early, and it was like a clinical hit.
It was.
And then by 10 o'clock it was over. I drove back to Omaha, and I covered Nebraska Creighton. I'm sure Creighton won that game too.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Doc won a few of
2007.
those. I have no idea.
Can I just reminisce for a second? So 2003, I was a college student, an intern at the World-Herald, and did not go to Colorado. And I was beckoned to South Stadium on the Saturday following Frank Solich's glorious win over Colorado to just monitor the situation in case Steve Peterson and Frank Solich had a meeting on that Saturday. And I staked out the parking lot in South Stadium for 5-6 hours, coincidentally with Matthew Hansen. And there was nothing going on, so we went and had lunch. And then it happened that night, about 8 hours later.
I remember that very clearly.
The circus of about 10 o'clock that night. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I'm just saying I was in Boulder for that, and we must have flown back that morning because I went to there was a game at the Quest Center back then, the Quest Center, about noon. And I remember walking around the concourse at this basketball game, and people asked me about, you heard anything? No. So by late afternoon, I just assumed it wasn't going to happen. Then it happened that night.
It blew up that night.
I think I was down in the old market having dinner, and then it was on the radio. That's how it came out.
I heard on the ESPN tickers where I saw it, and then it was a mess. But 4 years later, it was very different. It was a different time of day.
Yes.
Happened very early in the morning,
yes.
9:30, 10 a.m. I got to the stadium that day about 7 a.m. and was waiting for Bill Callahan and all the coaches to show up. And there's a little street out going east of Memorial Stadium's practice field there on the northeast side. There's a little alley that goes out to like 14th Street.
That's right.
And Bill Callahan drove out that alley, and the mass of media was somewhere else on the west side of the building. And I decided to plant myself in that alley when Callahan driving out. And I could have played chicken. I thought seriously about playing with him and just stand on the road. And I opted to get out of the way of his car, and that's the last time I ever saw him. So I think that's the last time anybody in Nebraska ever saw him.
Oh, my God.
No question. I think he's avoided college football. He probably could have gotten back in and gotten a head coaching job, but I think for whatever reason, it really affected him. And obviously, he's now a legendary offensive line coach. Like, people clap when he comes in a room.
It all worked out for him. I mean, he got a second career out of all that, and he became this good.
And coincidentally, was the biggest miss of Nebraska football over the 15 years.
Offensive line.
It's
unbelievable. I can't even, I don't know enough about offensive line play. I need to talk to more former Husker offensive
linemen. Well, they didn't have a line when he was here. He didn't take care of it.
They were better than they are now.
Right. But
good Lord.
But I think about the guy.
They were.
Think about the people who got fired from Nebraska. Solich probably had the best career. But then after that, it would be Callahan.
It probably would be.
But then it wouldn't be Bo, right?
No, he's kind of torched his career with what
Riley was sort of he didn't do many things like this, and now be interesting to see what happens to Scott.
Scott's going to be an OC somewhere and probably make a lot of money. That's what I think. Anyway, there's scuttlebutt going on with the coaching search. I've heard some of it today. We're recording on a Thursday that there's going to be a decision made very soon on the coaches. You know what? That's always entirely possible. I don't know exactly why. If Nebraska was thinking about announcing a coach who's not Mickey Joseph, why they would be doing that today when they could just as easily do it in 2 or 3 weeks, including if it were Mickey Joseph. Like, there would be no compelling reason to do anything today or to approve anything today. But this is how this stuff happens, and you never know. I mean, there's always those kinds of things that come up. My sense of it is that there's probably not going to be anything today. My sense is it's still going to be a late November trajectory, but by the time people listen to this, maybe they will have done something that none of us have expected. So you just never know. At this moment, like, I'm not aware of any candidate that's out there you have to announce at this moment other than Mickey Joseph, Urban Meyer. It's not going to Meyer, that I know. Matt Rule, who was fired from the Carolina Panthers. Does Matt Rule really want to get back into coaching right now, right away, because he would be? Or like Gary Patterson.
Chris Peterson.
So the other one is Chris Peterson. That's right. And so I'd heard a little bit of scuttlebutt, I don't know, however many whatevers, weeks, 2 or 3, 4 weeks ago about Chris Peterson. And I still think there's just an existential question there as to whether he ever wants to do it again. But if he did, Nebraska would be a great spot for him, and he'd be a great fit for Nebraska. I would love Chris Peterson.
It's just been too slow. There's too much time. You know, everybody's going stir crazy. So these things are coming up. These things are being. I'm not saying that I'm not going to dismiss anything, but I kind of am because, you know, unless it's Matt Rule. To me, he's the only one that makes sense. You're not going to hire anybody that has a job right now. You're not going to do that right now. And I think it's going to go to if you're going to hire a guy who has a job already in college football, it's going to go to the end unless he's leave. Like, Chris Kleiman leaving K-State right now with all these big games
he's
coming.
Never leaving.
No, so
stay
you can go down the list and go, okay, it's so.
I do think people are getting antsy. Like, Chris Peterson would be an incredible pickup. I just don't see that because based on comments he's made, for him to get back into it would require.
We haven't had rumors. We haven't had rumors, and now there's time.
This is how I thought the whole 3 months would go.
Right.
Like when September 11th the news dropped, part of the reason that it was like, oh boy, is because you're just preparing for 100 days of this, or 80 days of this, or whatever. And the fact that it hasn't happened really, I think is a tribute to how well Mickey Joseph has sort of rallied the masses and generated support, and also I think a tribute to how Trev Alberts has handled it. But I think we're kind of getting to the time, and I think you guys agree, where it's either Mickey or you need to move on, right? And it's I think emotionally people are torn on that issue. I think most people have sort of gone in the direction of, okay, it's time to move on. But there is sort of an adamant base out there that says, give Mickey Joseph the job and give him a couple years to prove it. So
I think it would take many years for any coach now at this point. I mean, the thing that Mickey gives you is you can retain some of the players and you can keep them here, and that would be great. But
there's no players to retain. There's nobody.
Well, then it's a rebuild.
No building
you can't give him a
blocks.
couple years. You have to give him 5.
But doesn't it feel like everybody's moving on from Mickey? I mean,
I was never on Mickey.
But I'm saying
I was.
Today's classic example. Hey, Matt Rule, here comes the rumor. It's time,
right.
And I think the way the backup quarterback thing was handled last week was showing an issue. The fact that the whole thing about Mickey is, if he wins 6, well, we're down to the nub here. We're at the very end of that, and for him now to win 6, unless he upsets Michigan, for him to win 6 is going to be he'll be at the very last minute. Well, everything has to be done by then. So I don't see that in any way. I think if it's Mickey, it's been decided already, or it hasn't been decided already. But it's somebody else, or it's either him or not. I think that right now we're kind of at the very end of the Mickey train.
For the record, Sam, nobody's getting 5 years. You might get a 5-year contract.
Yeah.
You're not getting 5 years.
Yeah, that's what I mean as a contract.
Yeah.
I don't mean a 3-year contract does not work. It's not fair because you can't go out to the recruits and say you're going to be there. So it'll be a 5-year contract. And Mickey gets it. It will be a 5-year deal. It will.
No, I don't doubt that. But this idea that length of contract indicate a recruit that you're going to be there is,
I know,
that's a fallacy. Because
I know but if you have it, then people are like, well, you're just a placeholder. So. And they wouldn't do that to anybody but an interim head coach who becomes the head coach.
Yeah.
Is my point.
I
No
agree.
other coach would allow that. So what I'll say is that the question mark I have with Joseph has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with what I've seen the last several games, which is you can apparently not tell your offensive coordinator to knock it off. Like you apparently not because against Boy. Every is screaming after Casey gets hurt. Slow down. Run the ball. Use the glorified, wing T quarterback and slow the game down and do something completely different.
Keep your crowd in the game.
Right. And what do? They do the exact opposite. We're going to put a guy in there because he can throw, and he couldn't. And then 3 days later we learned he didn't even practice and he wasn't mentally prepared. And, Whipple's like, probably wasn't fair to Chuba. And I'm like, probably wasn't fair to Smothers. Wasn't fair to the team.
It wasn't fair to your 90,000 people that need to show up either.
And ultimately, it's really not on Whipple. See, that's the challenge. Is like you can sit there and say, well, wants this. So no. It's really not Mark Whipple. It's you. Like, you're the head coach.
Yeah.
He can, and I said this with Tom on Monday. You have nothing to lose by telling him exactly what you want him to do because there's no relationship there to maintain. Like, he's probably not going to be your OC next year anyway.
Right.
So, like, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You might as well.
I think it's hard. I mean, it's...
Yes.
I
think Whipple's helped him.
2 months ago, Mickey Joseph was working for Mark Whipple.
Right.
It's a little bit challenging, I think, to suddenly switch.
And I think Whipple's probably very helpful
I was
to
gonna
him.
say,
here's all the things you got to do.
Yeah.
Which is why now, Tom's written the column about Whipple's health issues. So I can understand why that eliminated him from the interim head coach role. But if that hadn't been there, I'd have made him the interim head coach because I think it's so much easier. And that's not a knock on Mickey. Mickey still could have been the guy. But interim head coaches have a really hard time keeping the jobs after they get them, and it would have been almost more interesting to see Mickey have a chance to continue the role he was in and make a pitch for what he would do for the larger vision of the program and that he's in right now.
That's a really interesting point, that if you wanted him to get the job, don't make him the interim.
Well, because it requires him to manage his offensive coordinator,
right?
Which is the most challenging thing because that guy knows exactly what he wants to do and he's doing it.
But I think Mickey's old enough. He's been around. He's only not as old as Whip. Only I'm as old as Whip. But he's been around long enough to be able to. Okay, this is my show. Sorry, Whip, but here's what you do. You have been a head coach of a big staff in this kind of stage to really do that. Mickey's been a head coach, but not like this. So, but I don't know. This week people are saying, well, do you play the Smothers or do you play Purdy? Which way is it going to go? Which way is Mickey going to go? And here we are. This is where we're at right now. We've got a interim coach deciding between the backup who runs and the backup who throws.
I just don't.
It's not a good bait.
I don't. I don't want to I think your points are all valid, but if you're the AD and you're making a decision on Mickey Joseph based on how he handled Saturday, to me that's so far down the pecking order.
Sure,
right? They stink. they're terrible. Like, it doesn't matter who's
That's fine.
playing quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, you got to look at it super big picture. Like, he's got the organizational chops to do this, the executive skills, the recruiting acumen, all that stuff, or he doesn't. I mean, I don't think.
Well, that fits into that formula. But you're right.
I think it's just such an odd trial period because it's not. It's not terribly. It doesn't really. What you're seeing right now in Nebraska football, to me, it's not terribly applicable to where the program should be 2 or 3 years down the road, and especially when he didn't bring these guys in, they're not his coaches, they're not his players. It's just not a good situation. I mean, it's like I don't know. We can think of all sorts of silly metaphors, but
look, I mean, if they were in theory to beat Minnesota this weekend with backup quarterbacks,
I don't think it matters.
That'd be a huge. Well, I think that would matter. That'd be a huge feather in his cap. They're a 16-point underdog, the third biggest underdog in the history of Nebraska football at home. If you do something like that, then all of a sudden it becomes a commentary.
But again, the timing of this is not helping him because if you're Trev, you've got to be down the road with some people. You've got to be thinking about Well, you can't.
They are.
You can't. So you can't wait for him to beat Minnesota or not.
Yeah.
I don't think you can be a prisoner of the moment because if he beats Minnesota, so what? Are you going to change your mind when they go to Michigan and they lose 56-0? Like,
what if they beat Michigan? Like, I'm not saying they're but there does come a point where what you do actually matters.
If those two examples, I'll offer him the job.
I think
come here.
I think the first month on the job probably mattered. Yeah. I think the second month is probably pretty meaningless.
Okay.
Look, I've really tried to kind of wait on this thing, but this hire is so important for the program. It's arguably the most important they've had in a long time because the other ones have failed, right? But they've got to get this one right, and I think got to go with the guy who's been coach before at this level, somebody who has built it. I love the. Do I think he's great to stay with the new coach? That's a very complicated thing. Yes, I would. I think that would be great, but I think you have to go with the guy who's been a head coach.
I agree with Tom. It's not, to me, it's not about Mickey Joseph. It's about, Nebraska needs to find a guy who's done it at this level, and that's no indictment of what Mickey Joseph has struggled with over the last few weeks. Again, I don't think it's terribly relevant, but a proven head coach at the Power 5 level, specifically at a program that cares about football, I think that should pretty much be a deal breaker at this point. If you don't have that experience.
So there. Sorry, Mick.
No. I mean,
well, there's always Arizona State.
I'm okay with I mean, if it doesn't make any. It matters to me who the head coach is in the sense that, like, the way that I put it is I just want whomever the head coach is to follow a kind of internal logic.
Right.
And by internal logic, I mean you're about what you say you're about, and you execute the plan as you see fit. Your vision is executed. And the last piece is it's the right vision. And I think the hardest thing that you say that Scott Frost had to deal with is when Scott got here, he didn't understand the landscape. He didn't understand what the Big Ten was all about. He was hailed as a savior, and that's a lot for a guy to carry who doesn't know what it's like to play in this league. And when he got here, I think his thought process is, I was going to do X, Y, and Z, and those things are going to lead to victories. And when they didn't, or more to the point, when the Big Ten adjusted to him 1 year after he was here, he didn't have a secondary move. He didn't know his roster very well.
He bailed. He emotionally bailed.
One of the things that I wrote for Big Ten Picks column every week, and I thought I would run this by you guys, is Jim Leonhard is at Wisconsin, and he's going to be the head coach. So during the bye week, he shared with the team his vision for the next year. Now, you're not doing that unless you know you're going to be the head coach, or you're very certain of it, or very confident. So Jim Leonhard's probably going to be Wisconsin's next head coach. He's been there for 5 years as a defensive coordinator. And I thought to myself, what if Scott Frost had the advantage of being a coordinator at Nebraska for years before Bo Pelini fired? Because we all know Bo did not hire Scott. He could have. that Scott would have come here in 2011. He would have. When they fired Sean Watson, Oregon goes to the national championship game. They don't win it. There's this moment in January of whatever.
I remember that like yesterday.
When Bo Pelini could have hired Scott Frost to run the offense, and Bo hired Tim Beck, and Tim Beck is a full-time offensive coordinator. But if he had hired Scott Frost, Scott would have been able to be in that program for 2 or 3 years.
I asked Bo about that, and I remember him telling me, well, he's never called plays. So,
didn't he say, I'll have him my staff, but he'll do it. I'll do it my way. Is kind of what he.
No, he was like he never called plays. If he wants to be like the receivers coach, whatever, but he's not going to be the coordinator. I want somebody that's called plays. Well, he wanted his guy, and I think there was a little bit of Frost will. He's going to be bigger than me.
That's right.
he'll overshadow me.
That's right.
I think there was a little bit of that.
That's what happened at Wisconsin. I think Jim Leonard became bigger than Paul Chryst in many, many ways. He was like, well, that's the guy on the good side of the ball, and this guy over here is not.
Sam, that's what happened in 2003 with Bo and Frank.
It did. That's right. And then they didn't hire Bo, which probably was a good idea not to, but what would it have been like for I think it would have been completely different because he would have known the roster, he would have known the players. Bo wouldn't have been able to burn it down because they would have put Scott in that role.
That's a whole other show, man.
It's like an alternative
I think that's an interesting point. Well, what if they would have hired Bo in 2003, but they keep that staff?
Oh, I don't know.
So do you think that...
But it would have been better than Callahan or not?
Do you think...
He might have tackled someone on the field. I don't know.
He wouldn't have recruited like Callahan.
No.
Do you think that these 3 months or 10 months, arguably, do you think that they've been educational for Mickey Joseph, and how educated do you think they've been if he had the job? How much of a help do you think it's been?
I think he's. I'm not sure how much of the outside stuff he's had to do. The demands. I'm not sure how many of those things have been on his plate, or if they took those away because he's interim and he's really, really busy and all that stuff. But I think very educational. Every week's an education, and this week what kind of offense would you run? And he kind of laid out of the vision of the Big Ten cold weather running game vision, which is. I thought that was kind of interesting because in the SI article, he basically came out and said, well, we're not worried about a lot of these Big Ten teams. We're going after Ohio State. So he showed a little more understanding of that. I think he's learning a lot as he goes. But, I think that maybe Arizona State is going to maybe that wasn't just an agent trying to get his name out there or trying to get Trev's attention. I think it was part of, mostly. But maybe he will get a nibble somewhere. If he got the job in Nebraska, yeah. But again, I think he would need to hire a staff that included at least 1 or 2 older guys who have been through this a little bit and can still guide him through some things, because when you become head coach here, you have to kind of build a wall around, which I don't think Scott did. You have to keep things away, right? So
Bill Callahan taught us that, right?
Well, yeah, and I don't.
He was good at nothing else. He was good at that.
Yes.
Well, back then the former players were involved. They were involved to try to get him out. Remember, they had the 2 golf tournaments that one year. So yeah, I think every week's an education. What if Tulane opened up? What if the AAC job opened up? Something like that.
What if Willie Fritz took a job in Nebraska? Would he go back down?
Yeah.
Willie Fritz is an interesting choice. They're a good team, and they run the ball and they do a lot of things. This is a bigger discussion for a bigger day, or a different day after they've hired a coach or something. But I think a lot about. This will sound like whatever. I think a lot about keeping the main thing, right? And so this idea of what is the job of the Nebraska football coach? Like, what's the broad job? And, like, what does it mean to win games? And like, is it the job? And we're going to talk about this with Fred Hoiberg in a minute. Is the job to win games? And if so, if the job is to win games, isn't it incumbent upon whoever is tasked with that role to actually do it versus trying to do something that might win a lot of games but ultimately doesn't win a lot of games because they were so stuck on their vision? Like, isn't it incumbent upon a manager of whatever to be adaptable, so adaptable that they're willing to do the exact opposite of what they want to do in order to win? And the person that I bring up in this conversation is Bill Snyder. If you go back and look at the first 5 years of Bill Snyder's tenure at Kansas State, what did they do? They threw the hell out of the ball, right? They threw Chad May, the guy before him, Paul Watson. They were a 4 wide receiver unit. By the time he leaves Kansas State back in 20 whatever, they're running basically the option every single play. And I think it's because Bill Snyder, and he's a very imperfect person in many ways, difficult person, but nevertheless understood, my job is to win games, and I will change to win games. And I just wonder if there's a lot of coaches out there who understand you may have to do something completely different than what you're used to in order to accomplish the task that you've been given.
Can I do what the source of that is at Nebraska, though? I think it's the fact that the end goal is always the championship. It's always a super high ceiling.
Mickey said it. We're chasing Ohio State.
So you have to feel like...
What are you talking about?
You have to feel like you have to express that you're, that you have this grand vision. And if you compromise that vision, you are also compromising your high standard of winning a championship. Whereas, just you play to win the game, find a way to win the damn game. Mm-hmm. If you do that too often... the perception is, well, that's how you become Iowa. That's how you become, Minnesota. That's how you become a 7-5 football program. Whereas, Scott came in thinking, I've got to set a high standard.
Right.
I've got to do things a specific way, and it might be imperfect at the beginning, but eventually it's going to lead to 12 and 13 wins. I think if Nebraska had generally lower standards, the fan base included, I think it would be easier for a coach to take on that mindset that you're talking about.
You've got to understand where you are. Have an awareness of who you are and where you are, not where you think you are. No, that's not. The reality is they're chasing everybody, and maybe not chasing. Maybe not chasing Rutgers, okay? But they're chasing everybody in the West right now. Basically, everybody beats them every year. Right. Everybody does.
6-20.
I mean, but to get back to that thing. Dana Altman I always ask Dana Altman, when you came to Creighton, you pressed and you played full court and you ran, and that's not your style. You're old school Henry Iba, walk it up and so on and so forth. He said when you're at the bottom, you can't can't play vanilla. You can't do what everybody else is doing. You got to be something different. They're not used, and that applies to what you said. About Snyder. Mm-hmm. When he got to the Big 8, nobody threw it. They're all trying to copy Oklahoma and Nebraska. And so he was different. Then, at the end of the Big 12, when he's ready to, everybody was throwing it.
Right.
So what did he do? He went back the other way.
Right.
That's just, and, I'm curious to see. I've got a couple emails today from people telling me I'm full of it again. Why are you giving Fred Hoiberg a chance? It's a disaster. It's a fail. But can Fred do that? Can he flip his style and do what he needs to do to win? And so that's just good coaching if you can pull it off. And you're right. The new guy has to come in here, but going the other way means in this division. It means you're going to throw it a bunch, and I don't know if that's what they necessarily. They got to get physical.
Yeah, I would say that what Snyder did is he realized he wasn't going to win very many games in the Big 12, even version of the Big 12, unless they did what everyone else was doing. They got Michael Bishop, they changed, and then Beasley was there, and then Al Roberson was there. I mean, they were a running offense for the last 15 years he coached. Right. But let's go to Hoiberg because you had a good column today about Fred and. He said he wants this to be his last job, which Okay, that's fine.
It might be.
At least coaching wise. So I thought that was an interesting comment. But here's the most interesting thing to me about Fred is, I would argue, and I covered the beat sort of the COVID year. I mean, it was a weird year, but I would argue that there's a guy that had so much fidelity to his vision and to the way that he wanted to do it that he cost himself games every year. Like literally, I watched them run up and down the court with Michigan State, and I would think, you could beat Michigan State if you would do this. You should stop doing this. I watched Tim Miles do it. But you won't stop. You're going to do it because that's what you're going to do, and you're going to lose. And you're going to be a noble loser to Michigan State. You're going to lose 97-86, and you're going to come out and say, well, there was this moment in the game where, we were really shooting it well, and then there was a 12-2 run. I'm like, yeah, no kidding, because you're playing Michigan State. You're never going to beat them doing that, going up and down the floor. Now, in year 4, it actually appears he intends on trying to actually, in my opinion, win games. And the only way they're going to beat these teams is if they make it really ugly. They're not going to beat them the old Fred way. They have to beat them the way that Tim Miles was beating teams.
Doc Sadler leaves and they start playing like Doc Sadler.
I know. But, I mean, isn't that what people want? Isn't winning games the point?
Absolutely.
Or isn't it? Maybe it's not.
Again,
no, it is.
I think what applies to both these situations is if you muddy it up and compromise your principles in order to have short-term gains, does it hurt you in the long? Sure. I think Scout with that. I think Fred has with that. What they found is the long term is just, it's hard to get it right. Like you just can't, without the right guys, without the right talent, vision is just vision. It becomes a pipe dream. So I think in both of their cases, it probably would have benefited them to compromise their principles earlier and just try to win, even if it means pretty mediocre, mediocre performances. Because at least keeps in the thick of it and gives you a chance to make incremental progress. I think Nebraska still has football, especially has this grand vision of this is the way we're going to do things, and when we finally figure out a way to execute it, everybody else will bow down before us.
Right.
And it's harder than that. Everybody else is has the same advantages you have. So
that's true now. Yes, that's true.
No, it wasn't true 20 years ago when Frank lost his job, but it's certainly true now. And I think that to me the thing that gives me hope about Fred Hoiberg is the Big Ten is going to be a lot worse.
You have hope?
Well,
a little bit.
No, I don't have any hope. But if I were a Husker basketball fan, the hope would be that the Big Ten is going to have a lot of pretty mediocre teams.
Right.
And there's going to be a lot of 6-point games.
Mm-hmm.
And if Nebraska can find a way to win, 70% of those 6-point games, they'll be right in the thick of it. It's just, if you go down the list of teams, preseason rankings and top 100 teams in college basketball and all this stuff, there's just not much strength in the Big Ten this year. And I think that, that gives Nebraska a better chance than they the past 3 years.
With that, I don't know if it's going to be successful or not. I don't, and it's not even really about
It
Fred.
sure would help if they could shoot the damn ball.
It would. This is true. Yeah.
Well, they haven't been able to shoot it wearing the old style very well.
They haven't shot it in 20 years.
So
That's since Kerry Cohorn was there.
So if you're not going to shoot
Right?
it,
And Brian Conklin.
if you're not going to shoot it, you might as well try to do it some other way, or try to do it ugly. If it's going to be ugly anyway, then maybe try to take him at things.
Go ahead.
I really hate to oversimplify this thing, but he's better in the Big 12 than the Big 10. But there's a lot of truth to that. It's that Abdel Nasser, Matt Abdel Nasser was his right-hand man. He basically told him, you go get the players and I'll coach them. And he didn't really do much with recruiting. And so he put together this sort of all-star, NBA hopefuls, national recruits that didn't equate to the Big Ten. And maybe that's
Right.
oversimplifying it. And then you had COVID, and it kind of worked out. They won a few games, Banton, this and that. But it was the wrong approach, and now I think he kind of sees the light, but it just feels like it's going to be too little, too late. But but again, it's
I'll say this. I'll give a full defense for Matt. I think if you told Matt, I want you to put together a team that you're coach. No one else is coaching this team. You are. I don't think he would have put together the team that Fred wants. I think Matt would have put together a team that was tough. It was East Coast tough, with isolation scorers and big physical guys who could throw their elbows around, because that's where Matt comes from. I think the challenge that Fred has is that Fred still, for whatever reason, was caught in this sort of reverie of beautiful basketball that the Warriors play, and I don't know. There's actually not a lot of teams in the NBA that play like the Warriors at this point, but this sort of beautiful basketball they play, and Matt was not able to find those players. I mean, we don't need to dog anybody on the team as to say there are multiple players on that team that if Fred didn't want a three-point shooter would not be on the team. It wouldn't be on the team. There's no way they would recruit them.
Sam.
So I don't really I get it, but there's a guy on that team that can shoot. I believe that. I think Casey could shoot, but he needs 13 three-point shots a game to hit 6, and you don't have 13 shots for him to take. He can't be on the floor for 27 minutes because he's going to give up a basket every time he's on the floor. This idea that okay, we've got to find people who could shoot. You do, but you have to find people who can stop someone too.
My problem with Hoiberg is that we are going on about 8 years now where his roster could not execute his vision.
Right.
I mean, this goes back to the Chicago Bulls when they had Rajon Rondo and Dwayne Wade, and it's like they couldn't play his style either.
No, they couldn't.
It's like at some point,
and you could say that was someone else's fault, but
and it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't his fault.
Right.
But the point is, at some point, you got to let go of this vision that you have.
That's right.
and go out and max what you have. And they have a horrible job of that for 3 years. I mean they're just they get beat in every intangible way possible.
Right.
And they're not going to be good enough. They're not going to play pretty. But if they get better at all that little stuff, at least it's progress.
Yeah.
I don't think Nebraska wants to fire its basketball coach.
No.
But I don't know if Nebraska is going to have a choice.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I agree. I don't think they want to. But if you look at say you get through this year, however many win saves them 10, 12, 15. That's a hell of a lot. But you got to redo the roster again next year.
Pretty much. I
mean, it's
you
just,
can do that in basketball,
yeah.
right? I don't know.
But I just feel like, when are you going to start building? And is it just kind of like a year to year? I'm trying to save my job thing, and that's not what Trev wants either. So,
how many games do you think they'll win? They have 31. I think 31 guaranteed if you include the Big Ten tournament. Maybe it's 32.
12.
Does that keep his job?
No.
Okay. What do you think?
I'd go with 12.
Do you think he keeps his job on that?
No.
Okay.
The question is, can somebody make some shots, and maybe steal a few late in the year, and maybe go to the Big Ten tourney, get that first round win? That saves his job probably, because they're not trying to do anything. They're not trying to, I don't think Trev's in a hurry to do all this stuff all over again after doing football.
Who's going to win the Big Ten? Anybody thoughts?
You can't throw away $7 million because you want to hire Scott Frost 3 weeks and then make money an excuse to not fire your basketball coach who hasn't won anything in 4 years.
You can't do that.
At some point, you have to step up and take basketball seriously, and I don't think they can.
I don't know if Trev's the guy to do that, though. I'm not sure what. He never really did much with basketball at UNO. It was never. He had Darren Hansen, who was Darren Hansen, and he more times than often than not he won, but he didn't get to the NCAA. But I don't know what his vision is for hoops. That's what he wants.
That's probably a question we'll have to send to more when he decides the football coach is going to be, because I think there is something to be said for at UNO. and I've said this many times before, UNO is at an extreme disadvantage in the league that they're in because they have to compete against 2 or 3 football schools that are able to attract way more money. And whenever you're at a football school like North Dakota State or South Dakota State, you get the cafeteria, you get the training facility, the basketball team gets to use it too. It's just hard to recruit. At Nebraska, they have all the bells and whistles, so they have everything.
Yeah.
And so, in theory, you should get good enough players to compete with us. You really should. And Rutgers has been a much better program than Nebraska the last 3 years. But when those two teams are on the court together, I think Nebraska has held its own with Rutgers. It really has. And it won one, and I think it came close to winning another. There are teams that I think Nebraska can hang with, and consistently they don't. And I've been to Iowa many times. Nebraska has nicer facilities than Iowa. They have a nicer arena than Iowa. And dare I say, although I like Iowa City more than Lincoln, dare I say Lincoln is a better town than Iowa City in ways. Iowa is able to be way better in basketball than Lincoln, and it's not just because Keegan Murray and his brother grew up in Cedar Rapids. That's not the only reason. I know they got a bunch of McCaffreys too, but that's not why they're good.
They've always cared more about basketball than
bunch of
Nebraska has.
McCaffreys.
Well, they do.
Iowa has always cared more about basketball
Well,
than
clearly.
Nebraska. Always.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were Tom Davis, okay.
But it's not a nicer arena at this point. I mean, it just went there.
No, but they care.
There's nobody around Nebraska basketball that knows how to win, aside from the head coach, and that's debate at this point. Like, there's just nothing in the infrastructure that gives the program credibility.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's what's frustrating. Like, you can say, "Oh, we care because we threw a bunch of money at it," but they don't know how. They haven't hired people. They haven't done a good job of building expertise into the machine.
Throwing money at it doesn't mean you care. Around the coach with a real support system, assistant AD who knows hoops, then you go out and get a guy that's done it.
So where did they go wrong? Which was the hire that I don't think
Hoiberg,
they went wrong with Fred.
I thought Hoiberg was gonna do like I thought Frost was. So I don't know. But I mean,
did they go wrong early in the Miles era when they should have put more around him and they didn't, and then the year after the NCAA tournament team, he throws them out of the locker room and all this other stuff, and he didn't handle. I would probably admit he didn't handle that season very well.
Ever since they've the hot guy, player, hot guy went off in the tournament, beat Florida, whatever.
No, he didn't even win that game.
Doc Sadler had to hire somebody. It was August.
Yeah, he wasn't.
And then Tim Miles, hot guy.
I would say if I had to make an argument that Barry Collier did to them and what Nebraska did to itself by refusing to fire Barry when he needed to be fired is where the turning point was.
Don't give me that start.
Because, and here's why I say that.
Tom and I are having PTSD.
The reason I say that is there's just, and God love him, there's no compelling argument that Doc Sadler was like the right fit at that time, but he was the right fit for that moment because he was one of the few guys you could get. And he knew the Big 12 because he had worked.
Well, it was August. They had to hire a guy in August because Collier left at the lurch.
And they had to let it go.
And then you're having Steve Peterson hire. It was just...
These are horrible memories.
And Steve was to be fired himself. And that was a moment. And then I think after they went to the NCAA tournament, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sean Eichhorst was the AD. And I don't think he was sold on Miles. And there was just, I remember afterward Lee B writing the story about how he got Big Ten Coach of the Year, but Nebraska was dragging its feet on paying him his bonus because it was from this group and not this group. And, there was just all kinds of crap, remember, like around that. And it felt like Horst and Miles were the bad fit, and they didn't change anything with the program. And then they had a couple of bad years in a row, and some of that was on Tim, and some of that was on the support structure. And it just felt like nothing was quite right after this. Nothing was quite right.
Dirk, the what I'll never forget, and I remember going up to my hotel room in Kansas City and just screaming And then I basically turned on my computer and I continued to scream into my computer for the next 3 hours, and a column came out of it. But after one year they lose to in the Big 8 or Big 12 tournament,
Missouri,
first
they
round.
lost like 51-40.
It was something like that. And he's going to get whacked. This is it.
I've never seen Tom madder.
It was so.
I've never really seen you that mad.
It was so like, okay, this is going to happen, and then we hear, okay, I forget who the SID was back then. Said
tricky.
Steve Peterson and Mark Boehm are going to meet the media at the Crown Center after the game, and I should have just. I'd cover up for these to know you don't fire the coach in the hotel room after you go home, do all that. You do it you don't do it right after the game in the hotel in some ballroom. You just don't handle it that way. So I got all excited, like, okay, well, they're going to have real change here. And we get there, and it's like a wine and cheese party. There's no wine.
No, there's
but
fruit.
He's got
There's
cheese and fruit on the tables, and we're all walking around going, what is this? Oh, Mark Baines. Oh, have some cheese and crackers.
It was the World-Herald Digital Star,
yeah,
and it was Steve Peterson and Mark Boehm, and they had a 30-minute argument why they're buried back.
Yes.
And Tom was just fuming because Tom was like, "You guys don't care about basketball. What are you doing? This program is going nowhere." And Tom was right.
I went to my
and maybe
room.
that was the turning point. I feel like it was. When they didn't do what they needed to do there, they set themselves up for Perry leaving them at the altar. But then I also thought that there were things around that third or fourth year of the Miles era where you're just like, remember, Mike Riley got hired, right? So Mike Riley gets hired, and it's like one day before the Creighton game, the year Mike Riley got hired, so 2014. And Tim's there with the whole staff, and I remember Legal goes, "We got a game against Creighton. What are you doing here?" And it was a good point. It was like one of your biggest games is in like 5 minutes, and like go prepare for Creighton. And it was just like that. There was
Tim was really good at some really important things. He probably wasn't as disciplined as he needed to be, and he also wasn't. He just couldn't reach really talented players.
Right.
Like he just, from Ty Webster to Turan Petaway to Andrew White, he just never built. It was the strangest thing.
Too much about him.
He'd build these connections with the fans. He couldn't build them with his best players.
Yeah.
It cost him time and time again. It cost him, he couldn't retain and maximize those guys. And
right.
I think that was ultimately his downfall. It's ironic that Nebraska basketball, over and over has refused to fire the coaches they probably should have fired.
Yeah.
It's like Danny should have been fired before he was fired, probably. Well, that's not true. They almost made the tournament in '99.
Right.
Okay, so Barry should have been fired before he was fired. Doc should have been fired before he was fired.
Yeah.
Miles probably should have been liberated before he was liberated.
Yeah.
And they sure as hell should have fired Fred Hoiberg last year.
Oh, but he's back.
You could have fired Nee after the walkout, right?
You could have.
And then you keep him and you let him save himself by winning the NIT.
Yeah.
We're number 65.
They had a good team. They had good players.
But but I'm saying you could have had Bill Self then.
You could have.
Because he wanted to come here then.
That's fine.
But
That's true.
after he left Oral Roberts and went to Tulsa, he wouldn't come in here then.
That's fair.
But
you could have had Bill Self.
But again, that's one of those things.
I would have liked to have seen Bill Self with Tyronn Lue, and that would have been good.
He wouldn't have stayed, but he would have won
Right.
and left. And so, but anyway, you could. There's a million of those things. There's just a million of them.
So you both think that Nebraska basketball is going to win 12 games this year, and we will be looking for another basketball coach in April.
I don't know if I don't know what number it's going to be. I think ultimately it's something big would have to happen for him to come back.
So I guess Husker fans should be hoping that the clip show doesn't go well, right? That's the hire, right? You spare no expense, right? I mean, right? You talk about a guy that reaches the best players. Tyronn Lue can do that. Is that who you would? Is that the?
I don't know if he's coming here. I really think once you get in the NBA, it's hard to leave.
Okay.
And I'm not
agree.
sure. And I don't know if he's the answer in college. I don't know.
I tell you, the guy at Indiana is doing a pretty good job, and he's an alum. I get
Yeah.
it, but he's doing okay. Do you think they're going to win the Big Ten, Indiana?
Oh boy, I wouldn't pick him.
Okay.
I don't know who
You
I'd
like
pick.
Indiana?
I don't know. It's been. No, I don't. I think that's a big jump for Indiana this year.
You know what's interesting is that I've watched Indiana when they've come here. They're very skilled. They're not very big. They're not physically as imposing as Michigan. I'll take Michigan, or I'll tell you what, I'm just saying it right now. Iowa's going to end up being way better than people think. I think.
Hey, do you
And we're
guys
going to hate it?
Do you guys?
They are.
I don't know how closely you followed it. Do you think UCLA's is this really potentially going to fall through? Is the Board of Regents out there, or whatever they call it?
I think they're going to. I think they're.
Will they really block it?
I think they're rattling their sabers. I think they're trying to show them what we're pissed off about is ultimately they can't keep him. But they can't keep him. So they can't keep him. But I think they're going to make it tough.
Yep. All UCLA has to do is go back and look at a time when one state school left one conference for another, and it's over. You can't pick and choose. You can't suddenly say that UCLA can't determine its own conference affiliation when there's other state schools within the constellation of their system, which is the most the deepest bench of all university systems in the world. And logically say Fresno State can be in whatever league it wants to be in, but UCLA has to be in the Pac-12. Come on. Now there are tiers actually. I think UCLA is in a different tier than Fresno State, and so I don't want to get too far deep in here. But there are schools that are on the same academic tier as UCLA that are not in the Pac-12. So I don't know how you can logically make an argument that they can't join the league they want to join based on a lack of fidelity to Cal, because that's the only school we're talking about here. USC is private. Stanford is private. What else in the state of California is in the Pac-12? None. So it basically comes down to Cal, and we're going to make the argument that Cal Berkeley is staking its reputation, maybe the best public university in the world, on its athletic department.
I think the challenge is it's not just.
Silly.
Well, I don't want to
go ahead.
too deep in the weeds, but I there's clearly a lot of skepticism and resistance even among boosters, fans,
Sure.
alumni. Like, it's not as simple as just, the power brokers might stop us. I think there's some second thoughts about UCLA leaving California.
Well, wait till the Big Ten invites Cal. What are they going to do then?
Big Ten.
Sorry, we're not. We're going to turn it down.
So here's what the university system is trying to broker, I believe. I think the university system is trying to create a scenario in which the Big Ten has no choice but to bring California along with UCLA, and by proxy of that, Kevin Warren gets what he wants, and he gets a 20-team league. I don't think there's any chance that UCLA is not in the Big Ten, but there is a chance that Cal, Washington, Oregon, and Stanford are in the Pac-12 because the Board of Regents, or whatever you call it out there, will make it possible for UCLA to leave.
To me,
without
that
it being
makes more sense anyway. Like, it's a TV contract. The conferences mean nothing anymore. Just go to 20, make it easier for the West Coast schools to stick together. They'll play Rutgers once every 5 years, and just it's a TV partnership.
I wish somebody would stop this stuff. Because I'm tired. There should be a Pac-10 or Pac-12. There just should be. And all these Big 12 people that want to devour the Pac, well, we're going to take your Arizonas and Utah and Colorado, and there'll be no more Pac-12. 12, and then just like, come on, it's nobody understands how meaningful the regional games are, the rivalries. That's why I love watching these games. I don't want to watch K-State play Utah. I won't watch that game on TV. I don't care how much money they're getting.
Tom,
TV.
that's the frustrating part to me. Is like, just have a TV alliance, share your revenue, but play the teams that matter to your fans. Like, you should be able to have it both ways. Like, just because Rutgers, Nebraska are sharing revenue doesn't mean Nebraska and Rutgers should play each other.
Right.
Like, Nebraska should play Iowa State, should play Missouri, should play K-State, etc. And Rutgers, sure the hell shouldn't be playing Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska. Like, we can share revenue without meeting once a year on the football field.
But
I think UCLA and USC want to join the Big Ten for reasons that are larger than football. I think.
But they're gonna.
If you have access to New York City and Chicago to recruit the very best students that you can bring out there, and you can guarantee those kids that you're going to be part of a league where you can go back home and do whatever and follow your teams around the country. It's a big they're doing. I can tell you right now that Nebraska's recruiting, University of Nebraska's academic recruiting in the city of Chicago has gone way up. And it's not a small thing. There's more to it than just the football thing. And I think USC and UCLA want to get out of the league they're in so that they can diversify and basically nationalize their academic, enrollment. They want to be able to get, and I don't blame them. So I think it'll either be 16 or 20. I think UCLA's come either way, and the trustee will either destroy the Pac-12 as we know it, or they won't.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's going to be that UCLA stays there and USC goes because USC has nobody that can tell them no. And then the Big Ten's out there, panhandling for a 16th team.
The Pac-12 will last as long as the Big Ten says it will. And the Big Ten's ready to take those 4, they're coming. And then that'll be the end of it. The 4 in the South will go to the Big 12, and that'll be it. And then there will be nothing out there. And now Gonzaga wants to go to the Big 12.
Well,
Gonzaga wants to go to the Big East. I'm told the Big East has had the Big East ADs don't Gonzaga.
Don't blame them.
And so Gonzaga they're shopping. They've decided it's time to go.
Yeah, they're right.
I don't. It's not about basketball because they were the overall number 1 seed last year in that conference. So you don't need to be part of a better conference to be the overall number 1 seed.
Right.
I think it's about money, but how much money can be made if you're a basketball-only member in the Big 12? The flights are ridiculous. Everything is a 3 or 4 flight. At some point, none of this makes sense. At some point, but right now, it's like history class. You're Napoleon. You're conquering nations. You're taking this. You're taking that, and I don't know. It's I have a love-hate relationship with realignment. I love to do it, but I hate when it happens.
The people who you share your bank account with should not necessarily be the people that you share an arena floor with.
Okay.
And I don't know why those two things have to be married together.
That's an interesting point. Say that the Big Ten has transformed UNMC. So ain't nobody ever going back. They love it. The only thing that hasn't worked for Nebraska and the Big Ten is the football team's gotten its butt kicked because they haven't been able to adjust.
Well, I don't want to go back to the
basketball team was never good anyway.
I don't want to go back to the Big 12 anymore because I don't recognize it.
Get it.
I'm going to recognize it less and less. So
I'm just saying that like the UCLA Medical Center, which is one of the best in the world, is going to get a hell of a lot better being part of the Big Ten. It's the part that we don't talk about because anyway. It could be that they end up at 20 because that's where Kevin Warren wants to go.
Think about the football games. Every USC and UCLA play a Big Ten team. It's the Rose Bowl. It's the Rose Bowl every week.
It's gonna be awesome.
But but that's what made the Rose Bowl so special was Midwest, West Coast, boom, and now you get that every week.
Oh,
it's like it's not special anymore.
I don't think either of the two people sitting here, any of us, are going to turn down going to UCLA every 2 years or USC.
Well, no, I'd rather do that than go to some of the places.
Not only that, Nebraska football is going to be able to recruit Los Angeles again. I mean, it's win-win. It's all win for
who's going to be doing that recruiting?
You want me to make a prediction?
We're back to that.
Mickey Joseph will be doing the recruiting as a $1 million assistant for whoever the new head coach is going to be. All right, that is our show for this week. We'll be back next week to discuss Nebraska playing Minnesota, the first game in Nebraska basketball season. And then I want to talk about Michigan next week because I think we all kind of feel somewhat similarly about that university. For Dirk and Tom, I'm Sam. Thanks.